Hello there. Welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Licciardello.
This week, history in the making. Donald Trump becomes the first former president to face a criminal trial.
Our guest is going to be Judge Shira Scheindlin. Plus, as Arizona's almost total abortion ban sinks in, is the campaign tightening up? So much more. But first...
Former President Donald Trump was in a New York courtroom this week, the first time a former American president has been a criminal defendant. He's facing 34 charges of falsifying New York business records in order to conceal damaging information and unlawful activity from American voters before and after the 2016 election. The indictments were handed down a year ago by the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg and allege that Trump illegally covered up $130,000 in hush money payments to Stephanie Clifford, better known as adult performer Stormy Daniels. Trump's former attorney Michael Cohen has already served prison time for campaign finance violations over the payments to Clifford and others to model Karen McDougal, and for lying to Congress. He maintains the hush money payments were made at the direction of and for the benefit of Trump, to stop the women talking about their affairs with Mr. Trump. The challenge for prosecutors is to prove that, given that Cohen is a self-confessed liar. Trump says that he intends to give evidence during the trial, which could take up to 8 weeks, but Cohen doubts that his former boss will ever take the stand.
Every time Donald opens his mouth, you know that something non-truthful is coming out of it. We also know that he's not a good defendant. He's not a good witness.
Yeah, I don't want to get into too much of the logic of the trial yet, John. We've got 2 months for that. But basically, the question for the jury is going to be, was the hush money a personal expense, which is what Trump declared, or a campaign expense, which he did not declare? The prosecution need to prove that Trump would never have paid that hush money unless he was running a presidential campaign. And that might be a hard thing to prove. So that is on Trump's side. What's not on Trump's side, though, are quality lawyers. Take, for instance, this lawyer, Todd Blanche. Do not hire this man. He tried to subpoena former District Attorney Jeremy Rosenberg for the trial, but he made a rather embarrassing mistake by sending the subpoena to the wrong Jeremy Rosenberg. He said to some guy in Brooklyn who shares the same name as the ex-DA, but has no connection to the criminal case at all. So, the wrong Jeremy Rosenberg then replied with, "I don't have any files for you, but P.S. the phone number you provided was disconnected. And P.S. I'm keeping the $15 that you sent me to help pay for sending the documents." So yeah, not exactly the A-team there, John.
Oh, simple mistake to make. Meanwhile, ex-owner Elon Musk took to the erstwhile Twitter this week to tweet, "This case is obviously a corruption of the law. Lawfare." And Trump's other supporters include Jesus, at least according to this image that Trump posted on his own Truth Social this week. The former president has repeatedly claimed that Judge Juan Merchan should recuse himself from overseeing this trial because the judge has previously donated small amounts of money to Joe Biden's campaign and because Merchan's daughter is a Democratic political consultant. An ethics panel last year ruled that Merchan could, though, stay on the case, so he's there. Because, in their view, a relative's independent political activities do not provide reasonable basis to question the judge's impartiality. Trump, meanwhile, wants to skip some of the trial next week to appear at the United States Supreme Court in Washington for the hearing into his claim of presidential immunity.
The judge, of course, is not going to allow us. He's a very conflicted judge, and he's not going to allow us to go to that. He won't allow me to leave here for a half a day, go to D.C. and go before the United States Supreme Court, because he thinks he's superior, I guess, to the Supreme Court.
Yep, there's no shutting Trump up. He also asked to be excused to attend his son Barron's high school graduation next month. The judge, though, is taking a dim view of Trump's repeated defiance of his gag orders. While it's unlikely, Trump could face potentially 30 days in jail for contempt of court, regardless of the outcome of the trial itself. His lawyer, Alina Habba, thinks that would actually, though, be a political win for Trump.
Like anybody, he's concerned about going to jail, but if they put him in jail for his First Amendment right, he will be like Nelson Mandela. I mean, that would be just absurd, and frankly, they'll win him the election.
just like Nelson Mandela, 30 days. For the record, Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in jail, although arguably it did eventually win him a presidential election. So, are these claims of bias all just more of Trump's bluster, or are there legitimate concerns that Trump is being prosecuted by Democrats in a case presided over by supporters of Democrats, with a jury selected from a state, New York, which is also overwhelmingly Democratic? Could this actually be rigged? Could it be a witch hunt, as Trump claims? Shira Scheindlin served as a federal judge in the Southern District of New York for over 20 years after being appointed by Democratic President Bill Clinton. And she joins us now. Judge, welcome back to Planet America.
And thank you for having me.
So, in your view, Judge, should the judge in this case march and have recused himself because of his past political support and donations for Joe Biden and others, and his daughter's political consulting work?
You know, it's a very difficult question, and I think it's a close call. I think it's a closer call than he has acknowledged. The attitude seems to be there's nothing there. I don't agree with that. I think there is an appearance, a potential appearance of impropriety, because there are some statutes and regulations that govern recusal. And one of those says that if a relative within the 6th degree of consanguinity, which certainly includes his daughter, could benefit from the outcome of the proceedings, then he must recuse. Now, you might say, well, how does she substantially benefit from the outcome? Well, if he were to be convicted, there's no question that the many clients that she services, who are all very prominent Democrats, I'm sure there'll be ads saying, convicted felon now running for president. You know, who wants a convicted felon? So in a certain way, she benefits if there's a conviction. That said, I respect his decision. I'm sure he took it very seriously. He said there was an ethics inquiry, and the ethics inquiry decided that there was no conflict.
So is Judge Merchan's decision to not recuse himself appealable after the trial's complete?
It could be an issue on appeal. Trump could say he didn't get a fair trial because the judge had an interest and should have recused. And I think the appellate court would review that. Do I think they would reverse on that ground if there's a conviction? Actually, I don't.
Now, Judge, there's also a heavy cynicism coming from the right about the Manhattan jury. Now, you've seen a lot of juries in your time. Do you think it's possible to get a fair jury in Manhattan for a figure as divisive as Donald Trump?
I do think it's possible to get a fair jury, but I think it's not going to be easy. Manhattan was a district that President Biden carried by at least 75%, if not more. So it's a heavily Democratic district. That said, I think jurors do fulfill their oath, and they're being asked, can you be fair and impartial? And many have said they cannot. Many jurors have already taken themselves out. And even those who didn't take themselves out yesterday, on further questioning today, said, I've thought about it harder, and I don't think I can be fair and impartial. So I think jurors are very serious. And the final 12 that are seated, plus 6 alternates, so 18 people in the jury box, I believe that they will do the right thing, and they will listen to the evidence, and they will decide the case based solely on the evidence. Now, you can't know about their unconscious biases. We all have unconscious biases, not conscious ones. And these may be people who don't generally favor Trump, and it may factor into their feelings. But I think they'll do their best to be fair and impartial.
How much of a concern is it when Trump singles out judges and their families, for that matter? And how do you balance that concern with the fact that Trump needs to have the right to defend himself as best he can?
I don't think the right to defend yourself includes attacking judges. There's a real risk to judges that they may become the victims of violence. We know that Trump's followers have acted in a violent manner on a number of occasions, January 6th being only the most obvious. But they also attacked, I think it was an FBI headquarters at one point with guns. He can't control how his followers think they should respond to his attacks. And judges have been attacked in other cases. Judges have been killed. Family members have been killed. So I don't think it's ever appropriate to personally attack judges. and certainly not the way he does, to call them by names, saying things, they're crazy, they're biased, they're Trump haters, all that stuff. That could cause violence. So I don't think that's right.
Judge, we know that this has literally never happened before, but how difficult a task is it to put a former and potentially future American president on criminal trial? And I wonder, would you yourself, were you still on the bench, like to be judging this case?
Well, it would certainly be an interesting case to oversee, but it would not be an easy task. So I can't say that's something I would want to do. But if I were the assigned judge and got the case, I would know it's an historic case and I would want to do the best job I could. But I wouldn't reach out for it, that's for sure. And if I thought I had a conflict, I would step aside. But it's a very, very high profile case. I've had high profile cases. Most judges have had several, 1, 2, 3 high profile cases in their career, but nothing compares to this. This is unprecedented. This is a former president of the United States and a current candidate for the presidency of the United States. And that's a once in a century situation.
Judge Shira Scheindlin, thank you for being with us on Planet America.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Vice President Kamala Harris travelled to Arizona this week to attend a reproductive freedom event following the state's Supreme Court ruling last week banning abortion in all cases except when the life of the pregnant person is at risk. The VP describing that Arizona ruling as
part of a full-on attack, state by state, on reproductive freedom. And we all must understand who is to blame. Former President Donald Trump did this.
The Biden campaign launched a 7-figure ad buy in Arizona this week to warn of what a re-elected Donald Trump might do to take away more rights from women.
If Donald Trump gets back in power, what freedom will you lose next? Your body and your decisions belong to you, not the government, not Donald Trump. I will fight like hell to get your freedom back.
Yeah, arguing that abortion is a freedom issue, that's a strategy that Democrats often use in red and purple states in particular. And Arizona should be receptive to that message, because even before last week's schmozzle, 59% of Arizona voters said that abortion should be mostly or always legal. And that number will have only grown for a few reasons. Not only is Arizona now living under a draconian law from 1864, but the local politicians have been particularly useless. Republican Senate candidate Kari Lake in 2022 was a huge supporter of the 1864 abortion law.
I'm incredibly thrilled that we are going to have a great law that's already on the books. So it will prohibit abortion in Arizona, and I think we're going to be paving the way and setting course for other states to follow.
As soon as that law became a reality, she realised that it backfired and Lake changed her tone a bit.
This total ban on abortion that the Arizona Supreme Court just ruled on is out of line with where the people of this state are. I agree with President Trump. This is such a personal and private issue. I chose life, but I'm not every woman. I want to make sure that every woman who finds herself pregnant has more choices so that she can make that choice that I made.
She's sounding pretty pro-choice there for a pro-lifer. And when they're not flip-flopping, Arizona politicians are being kind of loopy. The day before the Arizona court handed down their abortion ruling, State Senator Anthony Cohen led a prayer literally on the floor of the Senate, featuring a bunch of people speaking in tongues.
Right now, we just released the presence of the Lord in the Senate chamber. We just released the hovering glory of God Almighty in the Senate chamber.
So all of this adds to that feeling that the issue has become a circus, which could well make Arizona voters even angrier.
The former president, meanwhile, travelled to the swing state of Pennsylvania over the weekend ahead of his court date in New York. Speaking at a rally in Schnecksville near Allentown, he summed up his successor's presidency this way.
Everything he touches turns to shit.
Although another major national poll this week has Donald Trump's lead over Joe Biden shrinking. His 5-point buffer in the New York Times Siena poll of late February down to just 1 point this week. There is a bit of evidence that past Biden voters are now returning to the fold. Biden is winning 89% of his 2020 supporters now. That is up 6 points. And while 94% of past Trump supporters continue to back him, that is down 3 points. Age, though, is still a big problem for Joe Biden. Despite his amped-up State of the Union address, 69% of all voters still think he is too old to be an effective president. Only 41% say Trump, who is just 3 years younger than Biden, is too old. We're yet to see, of course, what impact Trump's first criminal trial is going to have on these polls, but right now 58% say they view these charges as either very serious or somewhat serious, with twice as many women as men seeing these charges, Chaz, as very serious.
Yeah, and those kinds of numbers are quite consistent across the board when it comes to the polls. For example, Reuters Ipsos found 64% of registered voters described the hush money charges as at least somewhat serious, including 2/3 of independents, even about 4 in 10 Republicans. So the public aren't as cynical about this case as the legal community seems to be. But back to that New York Times poll that you referred to, John, should be a little bit careful about it because it has a margin of error of 3.3%. So that does put a 4-point swing in context, but it also means the deeper we dive into it, the more uncertainty there's going to be. Having said that, I'm a massive hypocrite. So here we go. The interesting thing for me about this poll is that it's continuing a trend we've seen in many polls recently, and that is Biden is way underperforming amongst the 18 to 29s. Biden beat Trump by about 25 points amongst the young in the 2020 election, yet here they're basically tied. Similarly amongst the 30 to 44s. But on the other hand, in 2020, Trump beat Biden amongst seniors by 5 points, whereas now Biden's beating Trump amongst seniors by 9 points. Once again, we're seeing that in many polls right now. And I'll show you where that trend is clearest. It's on the too old question you referred to before. If we break down who thinks Biden's too old to be an effective president and who doesn't think so, these are the people who strongly agree that he's too old, and these are the ones who somewhat agree. And if we combine the two, you can see that 87% of 18 to 29 say that Biden is too old to be an effective president. 87% is way more than the other demographics. And out of the over 65s, only 56% of them feel like Biden is too old to be an effective president. So that issue could be one of the reasons why Biden's doing so much better amongst old people than young people. Or could be vice versa. There could be a chicken or egg scenario there. I don't know. Also, don't forget that margin of error. It's important.
Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world to me that old people look at Joe Biden and say, he's not that old.
Yeah.
Pretty old for an 18-year-old, though. The poll also asked people to rate their memories of the Trump years compared to today. 42% say that Trump's time in office were mostly good years for America, while just 25% say that Biden's term has been mostly good. And 33% said that Trump's time was mostly bad, while 46% now say that Biden's time has been mostly bad. And if this is another election where it's about the economy, stupid, well, Trump is sitting pretty. 64% say they approve of the way that Trump handled the economy, compared to just 35% who say the same about Joe Biden today.
Yeah, this is becoming an issue for Biden. Over the back half of last year, the economy was beginning to improve. Inflation seemed like it was on its way down. Democrats were resenting that Biden wasn't getting any credit for it. Well, those arguments are harder to make now.
And so the inflation rates are down and people's incomes are up.
And I'm going to bring in Andrew Ross Sorkin right now because we just got breaking news. The consumer price index increased at a faster than expected pace last month, a signal that inflation remains stubbornly high.
Inflation just keeps on hanging around. And while inflation without food and energy is very slowly falling, food and energy, That's kind of important. And total inflation is stubbornly bouncing around at between 3 and 3.5%. Now, I know the arguments that Biden makes, that this is because of corporate greed. And yes, you can make that argument. There is analysis out there that 53% of the inflation during the second and third quarters of last year, and more than a third of the inflation since the start of the pandemic, was driven by corporate profiteering, whereas corporate profits were only responsible for 11% of the inflation in the 4 decades before the pandemic. And yes, I know that in historical context, the current inflation isn't all that bad. This is the last 50 years or so. You can see the average inflation rate between 1984 and 2008 was a pretty similar 3.1% to the 3.5% now. That is also true. And it's also true that wages have gone up quite a lot. You can see how average weekly wages have risen 15% since Biden became president. But that hasn't outstripped the inflation of, say, food, for instance. Either way, those arguments are not working. And you can tell they're not working because Biden has recently begun blaming Trump for inflation as well, saying we're better situated than we were when we took office. Inflation was skyrocketing. Actually, it wasn't. Inflation was 1.7% when Biden took over. But the fact that Biden is even trying to run that argument tells you that inflation is a problem. Take, for instance, this focus group of undecided voters on MSNBC of all stations.
I think he's been absolutely disastrous for the economy.
I agree.
Raise your hand if you think President Trump's policies on the economy would be better for your family personally. Raise your hand. All right, so that is everybody.
Point is, Biden needs to hear the people, because when he's talking about the economy doing stellar, he's talking about the stock market. He's not looking at homelessness or joblessness. He's not, at Eugene's point, and thinking about how much it costs to go to the grocery store. And he's gaslighting literally everyone in the process.
Okay. And Omar, you voted for Joe Biden last time, right?
Yeah.
Now, Biden would dispute what that guy just said, but the voter is who counts. One of the main issues with inflation, I think, is less the price of eggs and more hidden kinds of costs, like the Housing Affordability Index, for instance, hitting its lowest level since 1989. And this is a big one. Savings have fallen to 3.8%, which is not an all-time low, but it is close, which means people are using their credit cards more. And the average interest rate charged on credit cards, that's risen from 15.1% to 21.5% in only 18 months. Now that is the kind of financial pressure that really hurts. And while inflation stays high, so will interest rates, and so will economic disapproval.
The day after the election, if he wins, he will stop drilling and he'll go back to wind, which doesn't work. Wind doesn't work anyway. Well, we struggle with wind. Where's the wind? The pilot said it's too windy to land, sir. I said, that's okay. Land anyway. We have no choice. It's windy out here. It's windy, but it's beautiful.
Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson is herding a lot of cats at the moment. He stared down a revolt from almost 24 Conservatives who are opposed to the reauthorisation of FISA. This is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. FISA's Section 702 allows US authorities to monitor phone calls, texts and emails of foreigners outside the United States without a warrant. It becomes controversial, though, when US citizens are also surveilled when they are at the other end of those communications. Information gathered under 702 makes up almost 60% of the intelligence in the presidential daily briefing. So fair to say it is important. FISA was also used by the FBI, though, when they were looking at the Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election campaign in favour of Donald Trump. So he's not a fan. And this week he posted this directive to Republicans in Congress.
Kill FISA. It was illegally used against me and many others. They spied on my campaign. DJT.
And that's what inspired the Conservative Revolt, even though it's not actually correct. And we know that because back in January of 2018, a year into his presidency, Donald Trump tweeted this.
This is not the same FISA law that was so wrongly abused during the election.
Those guys should talk.
They really should. Look, I don't think that Trump's heart was really in this whole Section 702 fight anyway. He didn't seem very bothered after they passed the bill.
I said, you do what you want, but I'm not a big fan of FISA. I think it's terrible.
So in 2 days, he went from kill FISA to do what you want. And to be fair, there are some extra safeguards in that reauthorization. It reduces the number of FBI personnel who can conduct searches of Americans. It creates criminal penalties for abuse. It bars the FBI from searching Americans' data solely for evidence of a crime rather than for a national security purpose. It mandates more auditing of the search program, and it codifies a number of the informal rules that have been adopted by the FBI. And that's all wonderful, except skeptics are concerned that none of that will do anything. For example, of the more than 200,000 backdoor searches performed in 2022, the insistence on searches being for national security purposes only would have weeded out just 2 searches. And it wouldn't have stopped the searches on the communications of Black Lives Matter protesters, sitting members of Congress, or 19,000 donors to a congressional campaign. All those searches existed and they were justified with an ostensible foreign intelligence purpose. What the critics want is simple. They want a requirement that if you're going to deliberately sift through the data of American citizens, you get yourself a search warrant. But the vote on that amendment failed by 1 solitary vote, 212 to 212. In the end, the only thing that got this bill up was that Mike Johnson reduced the next renewal to just 2 years' time rather than 5 years' time. And they're also requiring quarterly reports about the numbers of Americans that they're searching. So, before you know it, they can have this fight all over again.
Yes,
Yay!
when maybe Donald Trump is going to be president. So in the end, it was a bipartisan group that got this FISA vote through. Maybe then, to try and make amends with the former president, Speaker Johnson hopped on a flight down to Mar-a-Lago for what was being billed as an election integrity event. And there he delivered a classic pander to Trump.
And so what we're going to do is introduce legislation to require that every single person who registers to vote in a federal election must prove that they're an American citizen first. You have to prove it. That will be a new part of the federal law and a very important one.
Now, non-citizens cannot legally vote in federal or state elections in America. As you might recall, President Trump claimed that he only lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton in 2016 because illegal immigrants voted for her. He then appointed an election commission to investigate, and they found no evidence of non-citizen voting or other widespread fraud, and it was quickly and quietly disbanded. Experts say, in fact, there's only a tiny number of these kinds of cases. The Right-Wing Heritage Foundation keeps a database. It found less than 100 examples of non-citizens voting from 2002 to 22. The left-wing Brennan Centre analysed 23 million votes from 2016, and they found 30 examples. Fact-checkers at the Associated Press, in fact, say there isn't any indication that non-citizens vote in significant numbers in federal elections or that they will in the future. So, seems like this is a solution in search of a problem, and maybe a way to discourage people from voting, especially if those people happen to come from a migrant background, i.e. less likely to support Trump.
Although, according to the polls at the moment, migrants are almost as likely to vote for Trump as Biden anyway.
True. Well, meanwhile, Speaker Johnson is vowing to finally get those bills onto the floor for a vote, providing aid to Israel, Ukraine and Taiwan, as well as another one creating kind of a lend-lease process for military assistance, all of which he would like to have done in the next week. Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene, meanwhile, is still threatening to move to sack Mike Johnson from the speakership. So we'll see what, if any of that, actually happens, Chaz.
Well, whatever happens, I'm sure it's going to be better than what was going to happen before Iran launched their drone attack on Israel on the weekend, because before then, the week's congressional schedule looked a little bit like this. It included the Hands Off Our Home Appliances Act, the Liberty in Laundry Act, the Clothes Dryers Reliability Act, the Refrigerator Freedom Act, this is all true, the Affordable Air Conditioning Act, and the Stop Unaffordable Dishwasher Standards Act. Seems like Mike Johnson might have been temporarily replaced with Bing Lee there, but maybe Ukraine funding might actually get up this time, John, because Gallup polling at least suggests that fewer people think there's been too much assistance for Ukraine, and that fewer people think there's been the right amount, and a lot more people think there's been not enough assistance for Ukraine. So we'll see how this goes, as you say. Maybe they'll end up sending Ukraine a reliable clothes dryer?
Yeah, or a deregulated dishwasher, perhaps. But that's it for another trip to Planet America. We'll see you at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on ABC News for a fireside chat on Friday night.
And then back here again from 9 Wednesday on iView and 10 on ABC TV. You also find us on Facebook and YouTube whenever you like.
Bye-bye.